My name's Lisa, and I work at Metro North Health and Hospital Service at the moment, and I look after ICT risk audits and compliance. I also sit on our local ethics committee. So Adrian, that insight into what the researchers think, and I used to be a researcher, was absolutely fascinating, and I hope we have some good discussion on that. But today I'm here to talk about IT security, data and ethics, and how to use data wisely. And I'm going to use RedCap as an example. So the first thing I want to talk about is just identifying and highlighting that the research data that we produce and use is actually an asset with value. So the research data assets might be things like personal identifiable information of the participants, the results of the research, the analysis and the conclusions of the research. So all of this data does have value, and in ethics, we want to know what the research data is, how it's being recorded, how it's being managed, how it's being stored, just to ensure that there are appropriate protections to secure the data. So I then went to look at what is the value of this research data? Well, there's a value in the intellectual property aspect and the value of the research that's being produced, and the value to the researcher and the research organisation. But there's also value in the data of the participants. Things like personal identifiable information, which a lot of researchers record, often without even thinking, as an identifiable way of controlling even not longitudinal studies, but shorter studies as well. So if we look at what that data might be worth, and we look at dark web and all those kind of dark web stats, information that contains personal identifiable information, name, date of birth, address, phone number, email address, even passport, or even sometimes medical records, that's got a value per person of around $1,000 on the dark web. If you compare that to other information, like maybe credit card information, the value of that information can be around $18 per credit card. So the value of this kind of information, it's personal identifiable information, is actually really high. If we look at what identity theft costs just Australia per year, the estimation is more than $2.1 billion in losses. For an individual that might have their information stolen or misused or fraudulent activity occurred, the average loss for each individual is around $3,000 per person. So this research data that we're collecting and the participant information does have real value. So the impact that this can have on both the participant and the researcher, well, we've spoken identity theft and fraud, emotional distress, financial loss, their trust in research, and maybe they'll never do research again if their details are stolen or misused. Obviously, a breach of privacy, they might have reputational damage to themselves individually and embarrassment from what research they've been involved in. At the very least, they might get unwanted spam or those phone calls from scammers. For researchers and institutions, the impacts can be reputation loss, intellectual property theft, legal and compliance issues, penalties, fines, and compensation needed to be paid. So there's real world impacts. From an information security perspective, we have a model to look at how we secure systems and define policy. And this is the CIA model, which has nothing to do with the American spy agency. And that's on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So real world harm can be caused from a breach of any of these three things. So confidentiality, it might be release of the patient information that might impact their insurance or their work, or it might be identity theft. Integrity, so the accuracy of the information that's recorded, or having someone maliciously change the information that's recorded. It might, for a patient, cause a change in their research outcomes and their treatments or such. Availability of the information. If we look at clinical trials, it might be the information about a participant history is not available to the researcher or the clinician at the right time. So then they might have a different intervention than they would have otherwise. So that can cause real world harm as well. So today I wanted to talk about something that I commonly see in ethics applications. which is a comment that stated the information will be secured securely in. We've got secure storage of digital information in some system. And that's all. So I wanted to say, what does this mean? And I'll use RedCap as an example of what this statement might mean. How can we possibly know it's secure from that level of information being told that it is stored securely? What does the best practice say and what do international standards say? And what might be the future of IT security, data and ethics? So RedCap, for those of you who are not aware, RedCap is, well, it's not open source, but it is a free to use application that's designed specifically for researchers to develop online surveys and databases themselves. There's heaps of information out there, so researchers can actually set it up and use it themselves. It's a really, really good tool for that. It was created through a university, and then it was released as a consortium software set. So you sign up to the consortium, it doesn't cost anything, you gain access to the code, you can use the code, modify the code, but you can't resell the code or give that code to anybody else. They all have to be a member of the consortium as long as they're a not-for-profit organisation. So really geared towards research. On the RedCap site, just at the top here, they say RedCap is a secure web application for building and managing online surveys and databases. It's specifically geared to support online and offline data capture for research studies and operations. So as a researcher, we are absolutely fantastic, awesome. I've got a secure application, so I'm going to type in that my information is securely stored in RedCap. However, if we actually read the terms that are written on the RedCap site around their compliance and how information is stored in RedCap, it's saying that it can be secured. It can be compliant. RedCap is a software application that you install on your IT system, wherever that is. It's a combination of that software and the IT system together, working together, that enables you to have compliance, appropriate information security, the controls for information security to mitigate any risks that you have working together. One can't be secure without the other. It's a combination. So when I see in these ethics applications that it's okay because it's secured, I have more questions to ask. Not just limited to RedCap, this is a majority of the applications out there. The security in how we define what the information security is the software and the environment in which it's housed. We need to understand both to confirm that the application is secure enough to store things like personal identifiable information. So ethically, a comment to say that the information will be secured securely in X is really not enough. We need more information to understand what the information security risks are as part of the ethics review. Let's have a look at what best practice is in this field. So best practice is initially understanding and being able to identify what the data is that you're recording. So what the classification of data is, whether it's identifiable, de-identifiable, or re-identifiable, all of those things identifying what you're recording. Things like the Australian Signals Directorate Essential 8 gives you the top 8 mitigations to manage cybersecurity risks. So these are basic practices that you can put in around software and the environment to ensure that you're getting the best protection that you can for your information. There's also an international standard, 27001, that looks at managing information security in a system. And that's simply a risk-based approach to managing information. So in Queensland, for our classification of information, we have official, sensitive and protected, and it's similar across Australia. Using the confidentiality requirement out of the CIA triad, we have low, medium and high. An official classification usually refers to things that can be published or that are internal to the organisation, published widely, and nothing that is sensitive or protected. Sensitive information is usually personal information, so name, date of birth, address. It also includes things like medical records and things that have more sensitivity around it. Protected level are things that have an extra sensitivity around them. So these are things like the mental health clinical records. On top of that, we've also got the national security information level, which is a federated, and it's at the federal level that one's governed. The Essential 8 security controls divided into 3 areas of prevention, limiting, and recovery. So you can see there's things like making sure the application or the software is patched, making sure that the operating system or the hosting, that the environment that it's lived on is patched, ensuring that you've got things like multi-factor authentication, which when you log into a thing, you might type in your password, then it might send you a text message to your phone that you have to enter in that number as well, just to make sure it's actually you who's logging in. And then recovery, it's looking at daily backups and making sure that you can recover if there is an incident. The International Standard 27001 is an extension of that Essential 8. So it goes through a whole stack of other controls used to mitigate and reduce the risk of having information security breaches. A lot of them are beyond just the technical. So there are things like implementing organizational culture around information security. So if you get someone call you up that's, Rob Hackerman saying, please, can I have your password? You have staff who are aware that that's not a good idea to provide their password to Mr. Hackerman. The controls used as part of information security, I like to explain in terms of dogs. Information security can be seen the same as the way that you secure your house. In your house, you identify the things that you've got in it. You might have people, you might have possessions that you want to keep safe and secure from someone who might want to steal them or use them or otherwise. So in order to protect your house, a policeman once told me the best way to protect your house is to have a dog, because the burglars will go to the next house rather than be noticed by a barking dog. So the way that this 27001 standard works is it gives you a system to identify if a dog is appropriate to manage your information assets, so the things that are in your house. And then it gives you a framework to be able to assess what kind of dog is most appropriate for the information that's in your house and the environment that your house is in. It also gives you the way to periodically review. If you might start off with a Chihuahua, and that has costs associated with it. And when things change in your environment, or you get more possessions in your house, or that you want to protect more, you might have to upgrade to your Doberman. Comes with additional costs, and it's using a risk-based approach. And this is what the control management out of the Information Security 27001 does. So using a risk-based approach in the information management of research is about looking at a not one-size-fits-all approach at all. It's about identifying the data that you're using, and if you can use de-identified data in your research, then you need less security measures than needed than if you're using identified data. So it's a great way to reduce the risk. Well, one of my favorites here is date of birth. I think in my time, I've seen 2 applications that really had a solid justification for recording the full date of birth rather than recording something like age. From a research point of view, age will often give you the same information and the same value as date of birth would, but you are reducing the amount of security that's needed around the information if you're not recording something that's so identifiable. So, and it's about securing the data that in a way that's appropriate to the data classification, the software, and the environment. So in ethics, what could we do to enable this? Well, we could look at having data management plans. So that this would be about looking at all the information that's fit to be collected, classifying the information, working out if it's identifiable, de-identified, or re-identifiable, looking at that it's justified, that identifiable information is actually needed, and they couldn't do the same thing with de-identified information. It's looking at where the information will be stored, so not just we've got a secure application, but how that application is going to be secured, what security mitigations we've got in place, and what environment that it's going to be housed on. So really looking at how the information is stored, who has access to it, and what the mitigations and controls are to protect the information. So for researchers, I'm proposing the future is to ensure that researchers think about research data as an asset with value, look at identifying the data and the classification of the data that's used in the research, and work through a process to ensure that the research data assets are secured in the most appropriate way. From an ethics committee point of view, we might look at having inputs of something like a data management plan, and ensuring that we have identified the data and the classification, including identifiable status, in the ethics application, so we know what's coming through, and looking at identifying the risks for both the software and the environment, depending on the classification of the data. And what I want to propose today is, whose role would it be to do this? Is this part of ethics, or would this be part of governance?